Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Okay, meeting will come to order. Diana, will you call roll for us, please?
Sure. Representative Andrew? Representative Brown? Representative Connolly? Representative Harshman ran upstairs to go get something. Can I mark him present? Representative Nyman?
Here.
Representative Newsom? Representative Obermueller? Representative Summers? Chairman Paxton?
We're going to start with 173, just because this bill has been worked and we need to get it out as soon as possible. And I'm not sure how long that 63 is going to take, but I'll give fair warning on 63. We're going to limit the testimony on that. It looks like we have quite a few people that are interested in it, and I'm going to limit that to 5 minutes, and Vice Chair Brown will be keeping time for that. So I suggest that you'll have a few minutes here to condense your testimony down, and brevity is always appreciated. We've heard a lot about this bill already in the interim, so I think most of us have heard a good share of the arguments, if not that direction, then through the emails that we've been receiving. So appreciate it if you would take some time and condense your testimony as best as you can. With that, let's take up the substitute bill 173. And before we move the bill, I think I'll have Representative Summers kind of give us a brief outline of exactly what this bill does after we've incorporated all the amendments and everything in it. It's pretty confusing. So if you would mind, Representative Summers, if you'd go ahead, that'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, this is going to be House Bill 173, substitute bill number 1. And so, Mr. Chairman, what this bill does in the K-12 funding model is it increases class size by 2 students. It increases model salaries for teachers by 10%. It adds nurses as a standalone component to the funding model based upon the recommendations in the 2020 recalibration. It reduces central office administration and school administration salaries by 10%. It modifies the health insurance component to only provide funding to those employees actually enrolled in a school district's health insurance plan. Districts can still retain any savings from funds that are not expended on health insurance. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this bill modifies ADM in 2 ways. It lowers the threshold for what is a full-time ADM from 80% to 75%. And number 2, it removes school year 2021 from the ADM average calculation in funding model ADM for the next 3 years. Model will still use the greater of the prior year ADM or average without school year 2021. And then, Mr. Chairman, the bill increases allowable cash reserves for school districts from 15% of the prior year's foundation program amount to 25%. The increased percentage cannot be used for CAPCON. So basically that 10% could not be used for CAPCON. And then any reductions to school districts funding is phased in equally over a 3-year period. And so, and then, Mr. Chairman, we go into the kind of the investment earnings from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and it redirects the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund investment earnings in excess of 2% up to full spending policy amount beginning fiscal year 2022 from the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. So right now, those investment earnings above there split into 2 pots, one into the LISRA and then one into the SIP account. The LISRA pot would become a school foundation account pot. And so, Mr. Chairman, then we go into the severance taxes. This bill directs the additional 1% severance tax beginning 2022, 2/3 to the Permanent Mental Trust Fund and 1/3 to the School Foundation Program. Currently in statute, the entire 1% goes to the Permanent Mental Trust Fund, even though it has been, that money has been brought back and utilized in various budgets over various years. And then, Mr. Chairman, this bill imposes an additional 1 cent sales and use tax. Basically, when the LISRA is less than 650 million. And if you add all those things up, the potential out there, when the 1 cent sales tax kicks in, it would equal over 300 million. And Mr. Chairman, that's it. And there's going to be a chart that shows the district by district, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, impacts of this bill. And you look at it and you're going, oh my goodness. They went from a $48 million cut in the introduced version to the substitute bill of basically $10 million reduction. But remember, there is that provision in there that phases in the cuts over 3 years. So it's really 10 million a year for 3 years. So you would have a total of, $30 million in cuts. It's just phased in. So when you see the 1 year, because the graph that we have, and eventually the public will get a hold of that, it'll end up being 30 million. So Mr. Chairman, that's really the bill. And Mr. Chairman, when it's appropriate, I would move that substitute bill.
Before we move that, let's make sure that all of our members understand fully what we're doing here. And I'm going to give an opportunity for any of the members to ask you any questions to clarify anything that they have on this thing that they didn't quite understand, because I want full understanding. I want everybody to know exactly what they're voting on. So if we have a question, now's a good time to ask it before we move the bill. Okay, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just because I can't find it readily, did we do this, the correct salaries for the teachers in this substitute bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I certainly hope so. I think it was noticed and I haven't actually checked that, but
I found it here. It's on page 41. And it appears as though those amounts have been corrected.
okay, good.
Anyone else with any questions? I don't see anyone, so I believe Representative Summers, it's appropriate to move the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I would move substitute bill number 1 for House Bill 173.
Second.
Okay, moved by Summers, seconded by Representative Brown. Any question has been called for? Question. And this requires a voice vote or a roll call vote. So Diane, would you take the roll, please?
Representative Andrew? No. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Connolly?
No.
Representative Harshman? Representative Nyman?
No.
Representative Newsom? Representative Obermuller? Representative Summers? Chairman Paxton?
Aye.
5 ayes, 4 noes.
Okay, by your vote, the bill passes. And now I think we're ready to take up House Bill 63. I think we'll start off with having Vice Chair Brown give an explanation of the bill before we move it in, or before we take testimony on it. So Representative Vice Chairman Brown, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Clarissa, at this point, I'd like to do 2 things. I'd like to go ahead and admit the Department of Education in. I think we will have Superintendent Balo as well as Shelley Hamill in the waiting room. And then I would also like if you could please share the document that I shared with you earlier today.
Mr. Chairman, I have admitted Superintendent Balo as well as Shelley Hamill, and then I will share my screen in just a second.
Welcome.
That's what I'm getting ready to do.
You're referring to,
Mr. Chairman, what you'll see on the screen here is as a brief summary of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll go through this briefly. And what I'll ask is if there's any inaccuracies to what I state and or anything along those lines, Superintendent Balo and or Ms. Hamill, please interrupt as necessary. But what I would like is if Clarissa, if you can just kind of walk through this with us and scroll as we move through here, and this will explain exactly what the background of this particular bill is. And Mr. Chairman, I'll start off with just a brief summary. What we're looking at right now is Wyoming is the only state that attempts to run its Part B and Part C programs of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I've been instructed to attempt not to do too many acronyms. We have a lot of those floating around. So the IDEA or IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And inside of that, we have Part B and Part C. And both of those reside within the Department of Health. Currently, Wyoming is the only state that houses Part B inside of another agency. So we actually house that inside the Department of Health as opposed to the Department of Education. Regardless of where the agencies have the governance of it, the ultimate responsibility does fall back down on the state education agency, so the Department of Education. Over a decade of legislative studies, federal analysis, Department of Education monitoring, many other discussions and actually interim studies by this committee have found multiple issues, and including management audit findings that have recommended that the Part B system be moved over to the Department of Ed. And then several comprehensive studies, I'll just read this one directly, and task force recommendations agree that Part B and C should be housed wholly within the Department of Education. Mr. Chairman and members of the public, Part B is the provision of the services of the IDEA Act with disabilities from ages 3 to 5, and Part C is the provision of services to students with disabilities ages birth through 2. Part B is a federally funded program. Part C is an optional program. As IDEA primarily concerns itself with these students 3 through 21, these two have been subject of considerable legislative analysis and federal oversight. If you look down in the IDEA in general, I'm going to read a portion of that, and that is the Wyoming Department of Education is basically required to report to the Office of Special Education Programs, that's a federal agency, of the performance of the state and each local education agency, which are typically school districts. However, an LEA in this state also recognizes the Department of Health as an LEA. The reason we have a recognition of that LEA is because you have to have funds flow to an LEA in order to get them to the child development centers or the CDCs. Part B mechanics, the Department of Ed receives the money. This money then goes to the Learning Education Agency, which is the Department of Health, and then flows from them to the child development centers. Part C, this is an interesting dynamic. The Wyoming Department of Education does not have any role in Wyoming's Part C program. However, in this bill, as we'll learn, it does actually have the moving of the component from Part C to the Department of Education. But currently it is strictly between the Department of Health and the CDCs. It serves serves children's ages birth through 2, mainly because the FAPE does not, the federal law does not take into account until age 3. Mr. Chairman, at this point, if Clarissa, I believe you have it up there, current programmatic deficiencies. This is information that has been provided to me through the Department of Education. And basically at this point, you see those 7 items. I'm not going to go through those items individually, as I do not believe that anybody in this room, nor anybody who's watching this, has not heard of these particular situations. But what they are, Mr. Chairman, is visits from the federal government that have identified findings, also management audit committee findings, as well as Department of Education findings recommending that Part B and Part C be moved to the Department of Education and out of the Department of Health. Mr. Chairman, down at the bottom of this, I would have Clarissa scroll all the way down to the bottom of page 3, and it's why correct these issues now. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to read this. I'll have Clarissa leave this up here, but what this boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, and the reason this bill has been brought forward by the interim bill and has been studied so many times is that we have a duty and an obligation to serve our students with the best options possible. And at this exact time, what we've had is well over a decade of studies and findings that have recommended that these particular programs be moved. This particular bill came up as an individual bill recommendation 3 years ago and was brought forward to this committee and was ultimately voted down. But this problem has continued to persist and the findings have continued to be the exact same. So this bill has made it through the Education Interim Committee, Mr. Chairman, and is before you right now. At the pleasure of the chairman, I would recommend we hear from Superintendent Balow and Shelley Hamill for any further testimony on the introduction of this bill, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Steve, folks, do you have any comments relevant to the introduction of this bill?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for admitting my staff and I would ask at this time also that Margie Robertson be admitted. She has also been boots on the ground with this. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify, we can provide information as a Department of Education in response to questions that you may have, or I can provide testimony as state superintendent, which is a little bit different. I just want to check your preference, Mr. Chairman.
What's the preference of the group? Just go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to just start and say that I've been involved in state government and policy in one way or another for most of my career. And I've never seen an issue that contained as much misinformation and fear to this degree. Recently, my office received a copy of an email describing how employees at a Wyoming CDC will lose their jobs if the bill passes. And I can tell you that there's nothing in this bill or any action that follows prompting this type of action. I need to start by addressing some of the more prevalent misinformation points and conclude with some serious programmatic issues that face our special needs youth. And then, of course, we will be available for questions and answers. I'll only address Part B, Part C, and Head Start collaboration, not home visits. And I would imagine DFS is on hand to answer those questions. The goal of this move and the goal of this bill is twofold. Number one, to ensure that more children and families access quality screenings at CDCs and receive early interventions. And number two, that we optimize every dollar for early education. But here's what our goals aren't. Several weeks ago, you and I received an untitled and unsigned handout from the Child Development Services of Wyoming, which purported to represent 10 of the 14 centers. On that handout, there were a number of myths and accusations and predictions, and no doubt you've also received follow-up calls and emails as well, and I need to address some of this misinformation. This bill lays out a framework for a governance change within state government that's supported by the governor, the Department of Family Services, the Department of Health, and my offices. This is not a large-scale change for local CDCs, and any changes experienced at the local level should be collaborative and with the sole goal of improving services for children. From a governance perspective, this bill simply moves several employees from the Department of Health to my office, and the fiscal follows that. Everything else remains intact on an education perspective. It would bring our Part B state structure in line with 49 states in the country. There are other components of the bill with DFS, and I'm sure you'll learn more. There's not a lack of a transition plan, which is purported to be the case. WD already oversees employees moving from health, and so there's no transition for CDCs. The plan to move health employees to WDE is set out in this bill, and will continue to make it transparent and take input from CDCs. But in order to respond to this concern when it first came to our attention, we've drafted a transition timeline and plan. The bill was presented yesterday to the Early Childhood Governance Task Force, and if the bill passes, a stakeholder group will immediately examine the timeline and offer necessary changes. This bill does not close CDCs or grow government now or in the future. A change in governance is just that. It's a change in governance. The bill asks for 0 additional positions and 0 additional dollars. There's no increased cost. This bill embodies 15 years of recommendations, Mr. Chairman, as Representative Brown laid out, and documented issues. It's simply an effort to bring alignment and efficiencies to the state agencies involved with Part B, Part C, and Head Start to better support the children of Wyoming. The notion that CDCs will be cut off if K-12 education is cut is not the case. And in the conversation with many of you, as well as philanthropists, the opposite scenario could be true. The programs are general fund and federal funds, not school foundation. Part B, 619 and C do not become part of the K-12 system. There was a question raised about Medicaid billing. CDC's bill for Medicaid services. This is not in jeopardy. The change in government or governance would not minimize, restrict, or prohibit any important services at the CDC level. There's also an assertion that the agency I oversee will stick to should stick to K-12, and that's it. But it's not that simple. The reality is that the federal government places responsibilities squarely on WDE for special education laws related to identifying and supporting kids aged 3 through 5. That's a responsibility that we take very seriously and a requirement by the federal government. Furthermore, kindergarten readiness, early identification, and early interventions are all keys to providing seamless transitions into kindergarten. This notion that somehow school districts will take over CDC operations and facilities does not appear to be grounded in anything. I'm not sure what it's grounded in. The truth is that school districts could bid for these contracts under the current structure. A change in governance makes that no more or less attractive. And I hope that all local decisions about early education are made collaboratively, and I would avoid having any of those decisions being made at the state level. We have substandard practices at some of our CDCs in the state. We have other practices that are exemplar in CDCs in the state. The Department of Health lacks the support and the authority to properly address them. WDE has the responsibility under federal law, but lacks the state authority to fully address the issues. Together, we recognize that we could do better with a change in governance. We share the goal and responsibility for every young person in Wyoming, and we recognize the wisdom in this bill and in the recommendations that lead up to today, and in my plea to pass this bill that carries both urgency and importance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we would stand for questions or go into additional detail on anything as desired by the committee, Mr. Chairman.
We have a question from Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Superintendent Belo, thank you for joining us, virtually at least. And so I'm going to, I don't know how else to be but blunt. What I hear and the concern I have is, does WDE have the capacity? Do they have the talent, the willingness? Will they manage this program correctly? And I worry about that. I worry about whether your agency can get this done and do it right. And that's what the concern I hear from CDCs in my area as well. So that's question number one. And then question number two is, if we don't do this, I've been hearing, if we don't do this, we lose federal money. I heard that from somewhere. So number one, is your agency capable of taking this on? And I want details. I want to know who's going to be moved where. Do you have the right people in place? Are you going to do the job? And then two, what about the federal dollars?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I responded before I had your permission, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, the answer to your first question is absolutely, and that's not the detail that you want, but I'm going to turn you over to the professional who can give you the detail. This answer to the second question with respect to losing federal dollars. I may have her put some additional commentary on that as well. The rumor mill is abound. We don't know of federal dollars that we may lose. However, as OSEP, the Office of Special Education at the federal level, continues to examine current and future deficiencies in this or any program run by the Department of Education or in any state agency, federal dollars are always at risk when there are deficiencies that aren't addressed. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Margie Robertson, who would oversee the team that oversees special education, as well as Parts B and Part C if they should move to the Department of Ed.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I am the State Director of Special Education at the Wyoming Department of Education, and I get to lead a fabulous team of 22 individuals who have passion, breadth of knowledge, and depth of knowledge around IDEA. I'm not aware of any concerns right now as to losing any particular amount of federal funding. There obviously could be situations where we were not found to be compliant, and that could put us at risk. I think the most important and urgent issue is the Department of Education is charged with ensuring that every child in the state of Wyoming has access to a free and appropriate public education. And when our agency becomes aware that children are not receiving that in any piece of IDEA, we're expected to address that. And we definitely have some situations where we've attempted to address and to bring things into compliance. And that's where OSEP could step in and tell the Department of Education and Wyoming in particular what we're required to do in order to bring this into compliance. And I would note, just recently I spoke with the State Director of Education in another state who was told that they are required to move their Part B under their Department of Education and to get busy on working on some transitions. So sometimes the feds do step in and they tell us how to reorganize things or things that we have to address. I'm not aware of any situation right now that the state is in. I really see this as a proactive attempt, really with the sole goal of improving outcomes for children. And I absolutely have confidence that the 22 people on my team, as well as bringing on the fabulous team of individuals at the Behavioral Health Division at the Department of Education, that we absolutely can address this and do this well. Not only to provide continuity of services for children and a smooth transition for our providers, because this bill also affects TANF providers and Head Start programs, as well as Part B 619 and Part C. But I also think we can optimize in improving the programs for these children. So I speak with complete confidence that we have the ability to do that and to be collaborative with our providers and to actually see an improvement for children, to improve services and improve outcomes.
Follow up,
Thank
Representative
you.
Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I hope your staff is of that quality. So since the day I first got elected to the legislature, I have been concerned about statewide accountability of education. And what we as the state are going to dictate down to local, whether it's local governing boards of a CDC or whether it's a school district or whatever. And this smells a lot like the state becoming even more involved, providing more accountability and accountability to a population that I think it's really difficult to assess what accountability means. And so I worry about where this may be going as it relates to more state, frankly, accountability of CDCs and early childhood programs. And I realize that, you know, we do want children to learn and have the same opportunities, but this is a different population. This population is not in our Constitution. This population is much different, and I don't want us to go down the path of being the hammer on local entities that know better than we do about how to serve this population. So talk to me about accountability and whether that's a path we're headed down.
Who wants to take that question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Representative Summers, I think that's such a valid concern and one that we hear as well. Part B and Part C are both governed by federal regulations and requirements, and we carry those out. You know, we don't, any additions to an accountability structure for preschool would either be made at the local level at the behest of the local entities who want to go above and beyond the federal requirements, or by the legislative body that would have purview over expanding some of our existing programs. But by and large, our job is to improve outcomes for our youngest learners, especially those who need early interventions before kindergarten, in the way that the federal law prescribes, not in the way that K-12 schools do it, and not in the way that Jillian Balow, as state superintendent, might want to do it. That's not the purpose of this. There is a solid structure in place at the local level that is supported, hopefully, by a strong state framework that supports positive outcomes for students, that is driven by requirements at the federal level.
Okay, thank you. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent, and I'm sorry, I don't know your special ed staff name. I didn't catch her name. Markey, Ms. Markey. I'm actually kind of perplexed by Representative Summers' question regarding accountability. I've got two questions. And the first part would be that because this doesn't increase accountability, this bill doesn't increase accountability, it shifts. It's just a shifting of the exact same accountability from the Department of Health to the WDE, where the WDE has far more expertise in with a special ed population than the Department of Health, is my understanding. Do I have that correct?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. And, you know, specific to maybe what some of those requirements are or where they're contained in federal law, it's IDEA, which is the Students with Disabilities Act, as well as what we call FAPE, a free appropriate public education. I hope I'm saying that right. And so that, even though it's not an accountability structure, that's what guides currently. Nothing would change with that. So yes, that's absolutely right. The shift in governance would do nothing to change that accountability structure or the stringent requirements as they're laid out in federal law.
Follow up,
Yep,
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, this is my second question, which is the purpose of doing this. Well, I want you to kind of lay out with just a little bit of specificity, not too much, but a little bit of specificity that says, why does this change in governance increase our ability to provide the services for those kids with developmental disabilities? We don't want to be mucking around, all right, unless we're going to have a good come out of it. So give us a little bit of specificity about how this will help.
Okay.
Who wants to take that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll give that a first shot and say that you know, right now there is sort of who steps first, who goes this way, who goes that way to address the needs and deficiencies in our CDCs. We believe that with this change in governance structure, that the Department of Education would be able to include the current Department of Health staff on this 22-person special ed team that is an expert on FAPE, an expert on IDEA, and we work as a team, not a cross agency. It would improve communication, it would improve services. And, you know, maybe the best way to illustrate this would be to just say, as we put together this preliminary timeline over the last several weeks since it was raised as a concern, I asked Margie to put an asterisk by all of the activities for CDCs that were new, that they wouldn't know about. And first of all, there weren't many. And those activities that did have a star or an asterisk by them were activities that better support the CDCs. So training opportunities, collaboration opportunities, monitoring opportunities, opportunities to work and interact with a bigger staff of experts at the state level to support student outcomes. And that's really what this boils down to. Sometimes we're not sure sort of which chain to pull, and it takes us going through two agencies to do that. One that's ultimately responsible for the outcomes of the students, but doesn't have the authority to sometimes do what's necessary, and one that cares very much about doing what's necessary, but maybe lacks some of the expertise or resources that lie within the Department of Education. So we want to be more efficient, and we also think we can find some ways to optimize every dollar that's spent on early education that way as well. Again, I want to be really clear that this is not a push down of K-12 education or a push of our youngest learners into the K-12 system. This is to very best meet their needs. And I'll stop there because that I'm at risk of sounding flowery now, and see if there's anything that I miss that Shelley or Margie may want to add.
Representative Conley, does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, I believe Representative Nyman had a question. I think he's next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent Balo, I just have a couple questions to kind of give me a better understanding of exactly what we're trying to fix here. Streamlining is awesome. Who doesn't like to be able to make things a little more concise and easier to handle and less cumbersome? But I guess my question is, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around here is, what will the Department of Education do that the CDCs are not right now, as far as how many kids are we missing?
Mr. Chairman, I'll turn that over to Margie and Shelley.
I'm not sure if I'm frozen. Mr. Chairman, Representative, as far as activities in specifically related to, can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry. What are we going to do differently?
Superintendent Balo, Margie, I think they may have frozen up. I'm going to go ahead and call our IT. I apologize. It'll just take a couple minutes.
No, it's okay.
So it looks like we three are live together and they're frozen.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the question, Margie.
Okay. And I can speak to state level activity dollar use and statewide child find initiatives and things that we could do whole state.
Technical assistance and PD around IDEA is going to be really key to this also.
Superintendent Balo, our IT is on their way down. I'm going to put up a screen just so folks on YouTube know that we're having some technical difficulties, and we'll hopefully get started again here in just a couple minutes. I apologize again.
Great.
mic off because I think everyone's mic is on right now. And we'll go back to Representative Nyman. I don't think he got to finish his question, and I think we still, yep, there we go. All right, Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to go back to try to kind of clarify my question, maybe it might be nerves on my part. I'm not terribly long in the tooth in my career here, so you'll have to forgive me. They tell me often I need to slow down when I talk, and so I need to do that. I guess the thing I'm trying to understand here is what are the CDCs not doing that the state will be able to offer them as far as, and I lead in with that question from the standpoint of how many kids are arriving in kindergarten right now that have not been helped, or that you're catching that are perceived to have not been handled or helped by the CDCs? And what would the Department of Education do to lower that number that the CDCs right now are not already doing? Would be my first question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, who wants to take that? Marty, are you up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, Margie Robertson. Yes, so I guess I can share, I want to give a little background about the state receives $619 to serve students 3 to 21, and we get Part B $619 for 3 to 5. And a portion of that money that we receive from the feds is considered to be state level activity monies. And that money is meant to benefit children in the state between the ages of 3 and 5, and to ensure that the things that Representative Nyman mentioned, that those students are found and identified and given services to allow them to close the gap with their non-disabled peers. Absolutely, there are to answer the question, there are between 400 and 700 kids each year that show up in kindergarten and identified in kindergarten as a student with a disability for the first time. And it's, it depends on the year. I think this year it was maybe 402 students that showed up. I think it was 700 the year prior and 500 the year before that. So each year it just depends. One of the things that we could do to help address this is to really work with the CDCs, meaning pulling them all together, all 14 regions, and to get some feedback from them about state activities that we could do to help them in finding those students. They have a very tough job to do. I think about some of the regions that serve a broad piece of the state, and they are charged with finding kids across the entire region. And so maybe there's an initiative we could do as a state level initiative for Child Find to give information to parents about what's available to their students. I should also just mention those 619 state level activity dollars provide technical assistance and professional development, and we could target and design professional development and technical assistance specifically to support the 14 regions as well. And we would absolutely want to get feedback from them about what's going to be the most helpful for them. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much, Representative Nyman.
It does. If I could have a follow-up, Chairman.
Okay, follow up.
I have one other question, and it's just trying to kind of help me wrap my mind around kind of how this works and how the testing happens. When the CDCs are testing these children as they're coming into the program, they are basically taking care of the kids or testing kids that are up to 4.5 to 4 years, 11 months. Is that correct? Or are we 5 years, 11 months?
Go ahead, Margie, are you going to take this one or?
Certain. Thank you, Chairman. Representative Nyman, you're correct. It goes all the way up to the child's 6th birthday. There is a little bit of an overlap in our state statute that it allows for children to be served in both places, but really they're responsible for the children that are not yet enrolled in kindergarten and have not crossed over that milestone for their birthday. And so currently they serve children until they are enrolled in kindergarten.
Follow up?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have another question and follow up to that is the fact that when the CDCs test these children at that stage of development, is it possible that the requirements or the level of ability when they have the responsibility of the kids is reflective and the children basically meet that level of learning or ability? For example, when they're 4 years old or 4.5 years old and they have a problem with their blends, let's say, the SP, spell or SPED or whatever, In the CDCs at that earlier age, that's acceptable. I mean, that's something that's just developmentally, that's where they're at. Or I guess my question is, when we're testing them then on in kindergarten and stuff like that, and they're developed a little bit farther and you guys get them, are sometimes the CDCs possibly being held responsible for things that they tested, and when they tested them, they were good at the level that they needed to be at. And then when they get to kindergarten, some of these limitations and disabilities or learning linguistic language or linguistic issues develop a little bit later on and then are caught. My question is it possible that the CDCs could be kind of getting a rap laid on them, that they did their due diligence to make sure that child was identified, and if it would have been, they would have helped him. But as that develops on and they get to kindergarten, that they catch that later on, is it possible that we're starting to see some of those issues that they wouldn't have caught early on because the child was performing at the level that they saw him at? If it didn't change over time and go on into kindergarten, is it possible that we would be seeing some of those increased numbers, which are different numbers? I guess I heard a number at one point was 1,700 children that were getting in there. So this is a markedly reduced number that I see right now. So thank you.
Margie, you want to take that one? Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman. The 1,700 number was the number of kids over the last 3 years that had been evaluated and found for the first time in kindergarten. And I believe that's the way that data was shared. I would share that of the 412 students, or 402 students, I'm sorry, that this past year were identified for the first time, only 12 had been previously evaluated in a CDC. So that means the vast majority of them had not actually gone through an evaluation. And to speak about the increase in possibly the gap with those students, the comprehensive evaluation procedures in Wyoming that are laid out in state statutes actually require that assessments are used that are normed based on the student's age. And so when a child is evaluated at age 4, they're compared to other students that are also in their same range, something like 3 years, 12 months, or 3 years, 10 months. They're compared to other normed students. And then when they're reevaluated in kindergarten, they would be compared against students that are in that age range. So I hope that kind of helps clarify. I just would also mention that Chief Hamill is here, and she is a special education teacher with some background as well. So, you know, Chief Hamill, if I haven't covered something thorough enough, feel free to chime in and add to this conversation.
I believe Representative Lyman has one more.
And I will quit after this unless I find something else. So basically on your numbers right there, 390 of those kids had not seen a CDC before they came in that had those that you found that were problems. And so that would be my next question then. How will the Department of Education do a better job of reaching out to these CDCs than what they're already doing? Because it's not mandatory. So parents don't have to bring their children into these things. I mean, my mom washed us off and gathered us up and put shoes on us and shot us off to kindergarten. We never had really an opportunity to get any pre-checking or anything. And Miss Baylor was smiling because she knows that's probably how it actually happened. But that's my curiosity. I'm just trying to understand why we need to quit a winning horse. And you need to help me to understand and know why, and what part of the horse is not performing. Because right now, and what I'm getting feedback is that they're doing as good a job as they possibly can, and probably better. And I've actually seen some information that Wyoming is ranked #1 for screening and identifying and serving the nationwide. And that's from the Office of Special Education Programs. And so I'm just curious if somebody's not being completely truthful at those numbers, or if that's actually happening. So thank you.
Who wants to take that? Volunteers?
Well, I can speak, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, I can speak to the 399 students that were not seen or appear to have not been seen. They may have been screened, and that points to one of the inconsistencies in our data collection system because it's divided into 2 different agencies. We don't collect the data about whether or not those students were screened but not evaluated. Unfortunately, we don't have the option to do that because of the way things are kind of parceled out currently in our state. But of the 399 students, I just note that Child Find, while preschool is absolutely optional and should be at the parent's discretion, Child Find is not an optional program. It is obligatory of our state to go out and find those students. So, and that is not just an obligation of the CDCs, it's also an obligation of our entire state system. Really, IDEA expects as a state that we are doing everything we can to go out and locate, identify, and evaluate those students. And so it really is the one piece in IDEA that requires us to be very proactive and to build relationships and to share information. So that's the part I can absolutely speak to. As far as the data that you've been shared, I cannot speak to that, and I have not seen that data to say that we're number one. So I will let somebody else speak to that.
Ms. Hamill, you have a response?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Nyman. I think that there's just been a little bit of a misunderstanding about that data on the OSEP website. So just briefly, on the OSEP website, states are categorized into 4 different areas, and they're placed or scored out on a number of identifiers, and those are rolled together. And so someone has looked at that website and said, well, you know, Wyoming for this area is in this highest category, but we are not ranked number 1 in comparison to any other states. It's just saying holistically with these 13 different indicators, we average out to be in this highest category. That does not mean that we're number 1.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm fairly well known for beating a dead horse. So I'm going to go back to the accountability piece, Superintendent Balow, and to my good friend to my right here, Representative Connolly. And so I'm going to take you to the bill. And so in the bill, we go into 21.2.202, duties of the state superintendent. And we create a new Romanette under additional duties of the state superintendent. And we create, be the state authority for early childhood education programs. The state superintendent shall, and then if you go over to page 9, big C, it says facilitate attainment of the goals of the state's public school system through effective implementation of early childhood programs. Provide a comprehensive network of programs and facilities to educate preschool children with developmentally disabilities. And then finally, E, establish minimum standards and approve policies and procedures for programs and facilities receiving state funds that educate preschool children with developmental disabilities and other early childhood education programs receiving state funds. I believe the authority is clear that you can pretty much do whatever you want in statute. I think this allows you to create an incredible bureaucracy on early childhood. And I think it will lead to an accountability system. So, you know, to either my good committee person or to you, Superintendent Balow, what am I not seeing? Because it looks clearly like in E, it sets you up to provide an accountability program.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I'm going to turn this over to the technical pros on this in just a minute, but I want to just preface by saying that most of what you just read in this proposed bill are federal requirements already. So it gives us permission, I guess, to enforce what we're already required to do. If there, you know, and certainly I'm not in the business of promoting or suggesting amendments, but if there's a way to limit that to what's in federal law, that may set up future administrations to not abuse what we clearly have no intention of abusing, which is setting up an accountability system that is on top of or in addition to what the federal requirements already are and what the local CDCs autonomously expect from their programs.
Margie, you want to weigh in on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't really have anything to add. I think Jillian put it really well. Superintendent Balow put that really well, but we basically just have the federal requirements and state statutes. That is what our accountability system is. And And even our state statutes are very limited to only what the feds require us to have state statutes about. And we have no desire or plans to add to that in any way. We really just enforce what IDEA, which is an act of Congress, says that children have a right to. And that is our accountability system, is our children getting what they're entitled to under the federal law. And that's our accountability system in its entirety.
We're going to deviate a little bit from our ordinary. Oh, okay, you have one more question? Go ahead,
Thank you,
Representative
Mr. Chairman.
Connolly.
Superintendent Balo, about 2 months ago, I received a phone call from a very distraught, and I'm just going to say an elderly man. He sounded elderly on the phone call. First, he wanted to know if I was his representative. I actually am not, but in Laramie, they think we're all their representatives. He might have been actually Representative Andrews, but he was really upset. And he was upset because his daughter was told that she would lose her job, and that she worked at a local CDC, and she was told that if we passed this bill, she would lose her job. And he wanted me to do something about it. So I'm curious, will anyone who works at a CDC right now lose their job if we pass this bill?
Anyone want to take that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, I believe that we've received a similar call and several messages in follow-up. And I want to be really clear and restate what I said at the beginning, that I've never seen an issue that contained as much misinformation and fear-mongering as this. This is not the case. If there are any job changes, those happen at the local level, with the exception of exactly what is laid out in the bill, which is the move of the existing employees at the Department of Health in this program over to the Department of Education, and the Head Start employee from the Department of Workforce Services to the Department of Education. Those are the only employee moves at a net zero cost to the state or anyone else. And all HR and employee decisions would continue to be up to individual CDCs at the local level.
Representative Andrew.
Thank you, Superintendent Balo. I have 2 quick questions. Will this legislation give the Wyoming Department of Education the power to dictate statewide mandatory curriculum for the CDCs? And also, has an investigation been done into the funding concerns about the potential increase in the cost of serving children with disabilities after the move to the Department of Education in light of the Campbell decisions? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Andrews, okay, those are 2 really meaty questions, and I'm going to start with the first one, and actually I'm going to start with the second one, and just say that in terms of an investigation, I'm not sure that that has taken place, but certainly we have slow-stepped what the fiscal transfer would look like. But remember, these are programs, these are early childhood programs that would continue to exist as early childhood and education programs within the Department of Education. We already have responsibility to make sure that those work, but they're not in our agency. They do not become part of the K-12 system. They are paid for with general funds, not foundation program funds, and federal funds that are marked specifically for Part B and Part C, and that would continue. And so there is, they really, they don't bump up to the Campbell cases at all, because this is early childhood, this is not K-12. Would you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Andrews, repeat the first question that I'm answering second?
Go ahead.
Superintendent Balo. Will this legislation give the Wyoming Department of Education the power to dictate statewide mandatory curriculum for the CDCs?
Ed?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Andrews, this does not give the Department of Education or the state superintendent any authority over curriculum or standards or make anything mandatory that isn't already expected in federal law. Again, this is a governance change, and what we hope is the only result to CDCs is improved services and improved support from the state, not new dictations as far as curriculum or standards or anything else goes. We will continue to implement the requirements that we have in federal law around FAPE and IDEA, free and public education, and students with disabilities being entitled to certain services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that answer your question? Ordinarily, we take all of the comments from our agencies first, and that would be Lachelle Branch from the governor's office would be next, but Senator Costa is here and he's got a time constraint, so we're going to allow Senator Costa. He was on the governor's task force, and we're going to allow him to make his statement next so that we can get him back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. RJ Cost, Senator, District 19. I was on the task force, asked to be on the task force. I've been in education for 31 years in upper education. And so I also was 12 years as curriculum director for the district. But that doesn't connect to this. The task force is what connects to this. And we really have a lot of misinformation flying around out here that I'd like to straighten up. First of all, the task force was really looking at how can we streamline and better coordinate what the people in our state, the parents and all, would be able to connect to the process of all of our kids in the CDCs, in the Department of Family Services and all those. Currently, right now, there's 4 different divisions. And half of the time, nobody knows exactly who to call for what. And they call one and then they have to go to another or whatever. Putting those into 2 groups cuts that down. There was never an intent at any time to take over a program and move it to anywhere else, like the high school or the elementary schools or anything. That has not been the conversation of the task force. The task force was looking for efficiencies in the way that we can put these programs together to better meet the needs of our students. As far as the curriculums in the CDCs, nobody is touching it. Nobody is even talking about that. That's not part of what this is about. When they move over the agencies at the state level, the coordination and everything is still going to go through the same people that were always there. It's just not going to jump from the Department of Education to the Department of Health to there. So then if there's anything federally that is mandated as a problem or a concern, it's directly under the Department of Education people so that they can work with the CDCs or anybody else that has something that's of a problem. When we look at some of the places where there's issues right now, Arizona is having problems and the federal government stepped in. We don't need that. We don't need anything near to that. The communication, the working together, and all of the materials, everything that together can make us a more collaborative and a more cohesive group is all we're looking at. There's a number of people out there that are worried that we're going to take over the CDCs. We're going to tell them what to do. We're going to do all this other stuff. That's not the intent. That was never the intent. The intent was just to say, how do we put the agencies together under 2 different groups? What we did is we started out talking about all the pluses, all the minuses of the 4 different agencies. We've been meeting in this since, I want to say early May. I could be wrong. It might have been a little longer than that. The meetings were sometimes 1 and 2 times a month. It wasn't like this was just something that instantly came up. Everybody had a voice. Everybody was present. If there wasn't somebody present, they had the choice because nobody was restricted from being there. As we put together the task force, as we went through all of the decision making, we came to a point where we said, okay, there's 3 ways we can do this. We could do it as leave everything alone, which we felt was probably not going to be the best interest. Everybody did. We could combine it down to 2 groups, which was one of the suggestions, or we could combine it down to a new single group. I had made the statement, I guarantee you, if you put it down to a single group in a new agency, the House and the Senate are not going to go for it because we're not looking to add a new agency to what we're doing. I said that would be expensive. We're not going to do it. There was talk, okay, fine. If it goes under the Department of Education, you're going to have to pay everybody at the rates that the K-12 is getting. This is not K-12 education. And so it does not apply to the Gillette rulings or the Waschke rulings. It's our early childhood, and that's important to understand. The funding and all is a totally different fund. So we were talking about, okay, what are the efficiencies of moving it down? We looked at the things that were in the 4 parts, and people had their comments. Everybody talked about it, and we did have input on it. Now there's some saying we're not sure that the input was fair and all. To the best of my knowledge, it was as fair as anybody. I mean, we were on Zoom and everybody had a chance to put in. We voted on it, and it turned out that the decision was to go to 2 groups. Then there was some dissension about it. So we met again in December, said, okay, let's talk about this and let's reassess. And the final vote was, I'm going to be honest, it was unanimous, but some are disagreeing with that because they said they didn't vote. And that's their choice. But then if you're not going to have a dog in the race, you can't say much. It was unanimous that they go to 2 groups. I didn't have any dog in this race other than the fact that I was on the task force and just trying to see the best for our students in our state. I hope that through this, the collaboration, the communication I'll put together is going to provide a better continuity and educational process for all of our kids. Am I saying the CDCs are bad? Not at all. Am I knocking the CDCs? No, not in any way, shape, or form. Do they have some apparent problems with the federal evaluation? It appears that way. I haven't seen that. But if they do, we need to work as a collaborative group to correct that. For us to say, okay, health department, there's this write-up, you need to fix it. And the health department's going, well, we're busy. We've got enough on our plate. We don't need something else. Guys, get it figured out. Might create the problem of not getting it done. We cannot have that continue because sooner or later, the federal government's going to step in on it. So that's the whole process. That's the whole intent. There was never any intent to say we're going to take over and we're going to be the power that runs CDCs. They do a good job. The CDC in our area does a great job, and we have a great relationship with them at the school. I was part of that. I created a liaison to go between the school and the preschools and all so that we would have great continuity. They found out that they could use our testing through the MAPS testing free of funds so that they could evaluate their kids in the beginning and the end. We didn't threaten anybody that we were going to take over their preschools and we were going to be the charge of it. It worked very well. The data is very supportive of a higher level of student coming with that work. And others have started passing or using that same thing. In Lander, they do the same thing. They've got a liaison. Thermop started it all. It's not just something that came from our area. So I see the benefit to working together, and especially with our special ed population, which is so vulnerable and yet so valuable. We need to make sure those students get the best education they can to be productive in our society once they reach 21. With that, any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, any very quick questions for Senator Cost? Remember, we're up against the 2 o'clock into this, and we really haven't had a chance to hear from the CDC folks and the rest of them. So okay, go ahead, Senator Representative Newsom.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Costu, thanks for being here, by the way. You mentioned efficiencies. Generally, we measure efficiency in dollar savings, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. So what other efficiencies would there be?
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Newsom. The efficiencies here has nothing to do with dollars. The efficiency here has to do with where all of this is housed so that the contact by parents and others is available so that we can get people to the right parts at the right time, rather than I call here and I'm referred here and then I'm referred there. So all it is a matter of how efficient can our programs run, not financially, because there's not a problem with that. Well, let me rephrase that. We all have problems with that right now, but that's a different story. But technically, there's not a problem with that. Nobody's looking to say, okay, you don't get as much money as you used to or anything else. What they are saying is, how can we best create a well-functioning group so that everybody is able to work the best for the kids? And one thing that's important to remember here is through all of that, it's the relationships, the collaborations and all. We have never intended in this task force to start any moving together of the agencies at the state level to even talk about how they're going to collaborate or anything. That's how they work together, and they have to set that up. That's not what this task force was about. It was a recommendation from the task force that this would be the most efficient and best way for us to operate. So,
thank you, Senator. Okay, I think we better move along.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. You can go back to work now. I'd like to bring Lachelle Brandt on right now from the governor's office and try to get some testimony from her. Again, we need to be respectful of the time. I want to give the folks who have opposition to this particular bill an opportunity to talk, and we only have about 30 minutes left, so brevity is appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Lachelle Brandt, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. I appreciate the opportunity today to share with you just a few brief remarks. And I really appreciate the remarks that Senator Cost just provided in explaining the work of the task force and explaining that these changes are much broader than just parts B and C. Just a few days ago, you heard the governor emphasize the importance of House Bill 63 in his State of the State address. We know to be effective that programs must be organized within a cohesive system that coordinates and aligns services. And currently, as you've heard, early childhood programs exist in 4 of our state agencies. And Wyoming continues to lag significantly, as I know you've heard, behind other states ranking at the bottom for the efficiency of our early education system, governance system. So to address this, last year the governor did convene a task force, and it included broad stakeholder representation to make recommendations for the improvements to our structure and to better leverage the resources that Wyoming does receive. Senator Cost again gave you great background on the work of the task force and their recommendations. The bill before you is based upon that hard work, that stakeholder input, and the recommendations of the task force. You've heard a lot from the superintendent today about the proposed changes in the bill regarding Part B and Part C. But again, what I don't want to get lost is that this is about rearranging programs that are sprinkled across 4 agencies to better coordinate and align services beyond Part B and C. So in brief summary, 3 programs that the Department of Education will assume is Part B, Part C, and the Head Start Collaboration Program. But just as important as those moves to Part B and C, the Department of Family Services will also assume and better coordinate Wyoming Quality Counts, and home visiting programs. There are 4 very important points that I want to emphasize and reiterate from what you've already heard regarding these proposed changes. Number 1, as you heard from both the superintendent and Representative Brown, these recommendations in the draft bill come from many years of analysis and a large stakeholder task force, including the entire field. Representative Brown spoke about the studies and data collected for over a decade that have revealed a fragmented system and the necessity for change. Most recently, during recalibration, the consultants pointed out that if Wyoming fully tapped the federal resources we received, we could provide preschool programs to potentially 25 to 33% of our students from the lowest income families. With 4 separate agencies receiving these funds, it is very difficult to leverage these resources to the best of our ability. We can and should do better. Moving the Part B and C programs from the Department of Health into the Department of Education does not require any alteration of funding or programmatic changes to the child development centers. Moving these programs from one agency to another does not threaten the local autonomy or the programming. Representative Conley was correct when she spoke about this is simply the shifting of these programs from one agency to another. Moving the selected programs into DFS will provide better statewide services for home visitation and better information for providers and families. The Wyoming Department of Health has provided home visitation for years throughout our state with success. The move of home visitation to the Department of Family Services allows for a more systematic approach to home visiting and its benefits. The current nursing model that Wyoming has meets the needs of many families, but through a comprehensive approach, we can continue to reach additional families through a variety of options in home visiting programming. We recognize that the implementation of this bill will take hard work and coordination among state and local actors, and it will not be done overnight. You heard the superintendent mention that a draft transition plan has already been addressed. Additionally, I want to add that the state recently received a federal extension grant that would provide additional funding and resources for the next 3 years to successfully transition and implement the proposed changes to these programs. So when the question is asked, why now? The answer is pretty simple. We have the funds, the longstanding data to support the movement, and the momentum to make meaningful change. And this is a unique opportunity. Let me close by just reiterating that these recommendations focus only on state level oversight of these programs and don't propose any changes of how the programs are managed or implemented at the local level. These changes elevate leadership, establish a framework and a foundation for which the state may build upon to provide better services to children and families. While there remains much work to be done, these changes will be a significant step forward for a more comprehensive, cohesive, effective, and early childhood program infrastructure. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Lachelle. Any questions for Lachelle? Okay, thank you, Lachelle.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
know, I just think that I would really like to have this bill wrapped up today, but I don't want folks to go away from here thinking that they didn't have an adequate opportunity to comment. So if we can get this thing wrapped up in the next 20, 25 minutes, that's fine. But if we can't, I'm going to ask the committee to table the motion and we can carry it over until Monday. So I just want to make sure that we have a fair and balanced comment period. And so far it has gone a lot slower than what I anticipated. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the public comment at this time. And so if there's anyone in the room that would like to comment briefly, please come forward. Yeah. Go ahead. Yep, that's fine. Go right there. It'd be fine. State your name and who you represent, please, and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Roan, and I'm the Executive Director of the CDC in Natrona County. So it's good to be here in person, and thank you for letting me comment. I recognize that this bill has been brought up for many, many years, and the Child Development Centers have been opposed to this bill simply for the protection of the CDCs. And I do believe that now is not the time to grow the WDE, not when we are trying to pull back on the WDE and with a $300 million deficit, as I've been watching in this House meeting. I've also heard many states, pretty much all of them, have Part B in their education department, but ours is in the Department of Health. Well, so is our Part C. If you look at the other states surrounding us, Utah, Colorado, Montana, their Part B and Part C are in two different state departments. I feel Wyoming does it right because our Part C and Part B right now is under one department, and it is a great department. The Department of Health has wonderful leadership. If you think about it, the CDCs and the services we provide go across several departments of the state. We are DFS licensed. Some of our CDCs do provide daycare services, home visiting. If you look at Department of Health, we do provide OT, PT, speech therapies, audiology through the EDDI program, the Early Hearing Detection and Intervention program. That is health. We do bill Medicaid. That is health. Infants, Part C. We are the experts on serving infants. Not WDE, we are. We've been doing it for 50 plus years, many of us CDCs. That is health. And outpatient therapy, some of our CDCs have outpatient therapy offering OT, PT, speech, nutrition, reading coaching. That, again, is outpatient therapy, which is under health. The only thing Department of Ed does oversee is Part B, IDEA. And let me remind you that only 7% of our total funding flows through the Department of Education. The rest is designated to the Department of Health. So therefore, the programs are not just education focused. They are very much health focused and other services. Wyoming is ranked #1 in the nation. I have the report right here that says children ages 3 through 5 served under IDEA Part B as a percentage of population by disability. This says all disabilities, Wyoming ranked #1, and I brought copies for all of you if you would like a copy. If you're wondering where Wyoming ranks, 6 to 21 ages, 6 to 21, Wyoming is ranked number 17 for serving children under IDEA. So I feel the CDCs do a great job, and I attribute those to the work of the CDCs. When you brought up the question, Representative Nyman, of our identification of children, we actually do have a state child find program, which is called Screen for Success. We provide over 10,000 development screenings a year. The 400 children that weren't identified going into kindergarten, you are right, 316 of those just simply needed speech. So they could have received a screening at 3, then went into kindergarten and needed a boost in their speech. You were exactly right on your comments. So thank you for that. So here we are, yes. Okay. I recognize that this bill is not just about the CDCs. I know it has other programs in it. And I guess at this time, we do have a fear that you will see the CDCs be non-existent in the next 5 to 10 years if you move us to the Department of Education. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Representative Harshman, quickly.
Yeah, I really appreciate you driving down here today to join us. I guess my thing, I think the last 8 years I served as appropriations chairman, speaker, and then I served 10 years on approps before that. And we studied this about 15 years ago and, concluded that it was what we were doing was right. And I guess, so I'm thinking like the last 8 years, I don't even remember anybody, no constituent has ever talked to me and said, hey, we got to make this change. Hey, can you run a bill to do this? I have not had anybody, not one person talk to me across the state. And I guess, so I'm wondering, this is really a task force that we didn't convene, right? And so I'm just, did anybody, you just got news one day there's going to be a task force?
Yes,
No bill in the legislature, no, nothing.
no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
One question.
okay, quickly.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And it's kind of a tough question, but you said, why should the state protect you? You're funded with government money, federal or state or whatever, but why should we protect you?
Well, thank you, Chairman Paxton.
Go ahead.
Representative Summers, I appreciate that question. The Child Development Centers have been serving children birth to 5 for over 50 years, and we do it with very little funding. Our funding is actually less than half of what the schools receive for special education. We pay for our own buses, our buildings. If a kid needs a cane, a walker, a wheelchair, we pay for that. We raise much needed funds to pay for that. Why would we want to hinder these nonprofit programs that have been in place for 53 years due to unintended consequences that could take place with this move?
Okay, quickly. We're going to have to carry this over, I can tell already, because we're not allowing people to.
Yeah, I
some time to
appreciate that.
comment.
I think, Mr. Chairman, we probably will have to carry it over because this is a program in my town and I don't want to rush past this. Now you talked about raising money. So there's a private piece of this that I'd like you to describe, of kind of just generally describe the kind of people that are vested in this kind of program in our community. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Paxton and Representative Obermuller. You are exactly right. For my program, due to the money we receive from the federal and state, I serve 570 children, and I don't receive enough funding to be able to provide them all the services they need. So I raise on average $300,000 a year to offset my program and the needs of the children. So my community is heavily vested in our Child Development Center, as well as I have a board of 14 community members, as every CDC does, who are also vested. And actually, right now, the CDCs are required to raise 3% match to any state and federal dollars that we receive. And I noticed in this bill, that line was taken out for some reason. But we have to raise money to keep our programs what they are. It's a necessity.
Okay, other questions?
Brief one, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Ms. Rowan, thank you for driving down here. I do appreciate it. I also appreciate all your time that you spent with the task force and everything else. I truly do. You made an assertion that I would like some clarification on if I could. Your assertion was that if this bill passes, it would be the beginning of the end for the CDCs. What foundation do you have for that assertion?
Thank you, Chairman Paxton and Representative Brown. I can tell you that my fear and distrust in the Department of Education comes from a conversation with Superintendent Balow 3 years ago, when I had a conversation with her about our programs moving to the Department of Education. It was actually at former Superintendent Judy Catchpole's house in front of Susie McMurray, Dickie Shaner, Judy Catchpole, and Superintendent Balow. And she said at that time that we would lose our autonomy and be reporting to school districts. Ever since then, I have lost faith in this bill, and that's why I have been opposed to it. And she cannot deny that because of the other people that were in the room that also heard that conversation and are well aware of it. So I guess that is where the distrust lies in me, and I would hate for these nonprofits to lose their autonomy after 50 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to testify? Yes, come forward, please. Introduce yourself. Tell us who you represent.
Thank you, Chairman Paxton, committee members. I'm Jamie Stein. I am the Executive Director for Developmental Preschool and Daycare Center in Laramie, Wyoming. I also serve as a member on the Governor's Early Childhood State Advisory Council, as well as I have participated in the Governance Task Force. So I've been very involved in this entire process. I've been present at nearly every meeting that has been held for both of those categories or both of those committees. And I have been very vocal about my concerns with the recommendations for moving our programs to Department of Ed, and I heavily advocated if a change was to happen, that it should be that we are combined with Family Services, Department of Family Services. I just feel like that would be a better alignment. But That's not the recommendation that came out from the task force. So we're looking at legislation to move us to Department of Education. A few things that in sitting here today, I actually am left with more questions than answers with just some of the conversation and comments that have been made throughout the day. And so I wanted to pose some of these questions to you all, as I hope that you have some of the same questions as well. There was great conversation from Department of Education about why these programs, Part B and Part C, need to move to Department of Ed. One of those was stated that there was 7 complaints and compliance issues that had been found in the Part B program over the last 10 years. I asked the Department of Education, okay, well, how many complaints and compliance concerns have there been through K-12 in that same period? They could not answer that question for me. But when we start looking at some of those visits, those OSEP visits that came and the information that was put up on the board earlier, one that caught my attention was one that was a visit because the Department of Education was not providing the monitoring for our programs. And at that point, the monitoring was being done by the EIEP, which is our district. It is, I think we can all agree, we're designated as a district. And so basically what OSEP said is that the district could not monitor themselves, that WDE needed to monitor the district. Well, here we are having the conversation to move us, and what we have been told is that this move would basically make WDE the LEA as well. So they would become the district for preschool. So doesn't that mean that then WDE is monitoring themselves?
If you can, please avoid using acronyms so that
The Department of Education.
we're streaming this
sorry.
and there are a lot of people who may not understand the acronyms. Thank you.
Point taken, yes. So Department of Education would have to be monitoring themselves as their own local education agency. That raises concerns in my mind. My big question is, there was a lot of conversation about all of the great things that will come out of this move: increased professional development, increased technical assistance. Why can't that be provided now? Under federal law, it says that Department of Education should be providing that already. What is the barrier? Where is this magic barrier that says they can't do it because we report to the Department of Health? As a school district, I feel like the way that this is being handled is different than they handle any other situation with any other compliance concerns with any other district in the state. We should be treated the exact same way that all the rest of the districts would be handled if there are compliance concerns. And I don't feel that that is the case.
You have about a minute to wrap up, please.
Thank you for that warning. I would like them to explain what this process looks like. They've said that there are concerns with a few of the CDCs with not being able to be compliant, not providing free appropriate public education. How do they handle those situations with the other school districts? Have they proposed to bring those school districts into the direct control of Department of Education? No, that's what they're doing with this request.
Questions from the committee, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Actually, before I came in here, one of my ideas was to just put this under DFS, all of it. So you support that idea?
I do support that idea, and I have answered that question to several other legislators. Senator Rothfuss asked me that question point blank. Collectively, the group of CDCs that participate in CDS of Wyoming did come together. We agreed that that would be a good option, a good alternative option for our programs. And it's more in line with how we provide services to the families and to the kids in that birth to 5 category. We do have a much more family focus, even with the educational piece, than what we typically see in the school districts. And we just feel like that would be a much better fit for our programs and the way that we operate. And we're already licensed by Department of Family Services. In my program, 100% of the kids that I deal with every single day are governed by DFS rules. Less than 50% of my kids are under IDEA, or the Individual Disabilities with Education Act.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Representative Conley.
Chairman, Ms. Stein, you heard the question that I asked the superintendent about the gentleman who called about his daughter. The end of that conversation was me asking him to please have his daughter call me. His response was, she won't do that. She's afraid of her boss. I didn't laugh. I'm sorry. I didn't laugh.
Chairman
ahead.
Paxton.
Go ahead.
Representative Connolly, thank you for that question. And I laugh because I honestly don't know where that last piece came from. But what I will answer, and when you asked that question earlier, I wanted the chance to answer it myself, because the conversation that I have with my staff is there is a very real possibility, if our worst fears are realized, if we move to the Department of Education, and if for some reason the school districts are able to take over our programs, there is an open door for that. How else are they going to deal with the CDCs that have failed to be compliant? What is their answer? What is their solution to that? The only other people or organizations that could be ready to step in and take over are the school districts. So if that were to happen, and our contracts were pulled from my CDC, I would have to lay off my employees, because if I'm not receiving the contract from the state to provide services for Part C and Part B, I have no reason to employ occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language pathologists, special education teachers. So there is a very real concern for our staff that if our worst fears are realized, absolutely, they could be losing a job.
Mr. Chair.
Follow up?
Mr. Chair, I'm so sorry, but Ms. Stein, that to me is almost like saying the worst fear would be an asteroid hitting. In all honesty, the worst fear would be that the federal government no longer provide the funding that you are now getting through the Department of Health. This is about a change in governance. Wouldn't you agree?
Chairman Paxton.
Go ahead.
Representative Connolly, on the surface, yes, that is what this entire conversation has been about. And that's what the governance task force has been about, is that change in governance. And I support some change to happen at the state level, because I do believe that we have a very disconnected system, or a lack of a system altogether, for early childhood. And I do support that. My concern is with the change that could potentially leave 46 privately operated nonprofit facilities around the state in jeopardy of being closed, because those services could be taken over by the school districts. We have asked for years for some sort of legislation, if this change were to happen, to be put in place to protect those private businesses, those private organizations that have spent, in my case, we've been in Laramie for 68 years. We need to protect these organizations. Obviously, if there are concerns and compliance issues that need to be dealt with, then we need a process to deal with that. And the governance piece of that, I completely agree that there needs to be some change in governance, but this bill doesn't prevent those fears from happening.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
That's Clarissa.
Oh, Clarissa, yes.
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent Balo has raised her hand again.
Well, I think we're going to have to delay her comments. I think we'll go ahead with, there may be someone else here that won't be able to travel on Monday. So I think we'll take whoever we can take in the room. Maybe might have time for one more, and that'd be it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question if I could.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Stein, you have said it 2 or 3 times in your testimony that you're afraid that the school districts could take over your contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it true that they could currently take over those contracts in state law as it reads right now?
Chairman Paxton.
Go ahead.
Representative Brown, thank you for that question. In theory, yes.
Okay.
And my question.
That's all I needed, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. It's obvious. Go ahead.
Just, Mr. Chairman, at some point, I would like to hear Superintendent Balo's response to actually an allegation from the director from Casper.
Well, one of the problems is I just need to find out if there's anyone else that's in the room that have traveled a long distance that would like to testify and won't be able to come back on Monday. And if there is, we'll take that testimony. If not, then we'll let Superintendent reply. Is there anyone in here that, in the room, that will not be able to attend either by Zoom or any other way on Monday when we continue this? I don't see any hands, so I think we're okay. So Superintendent Bela, would you like to comment? Remember, we're up against a hard stop here in a minute. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to respond, and I'm taking a page from the Al Simpson playbook that says, don't let misinformation linger. So I want to try to clear that up. There was a pretty significant allegation made that I said school districts would take over CDCs, and that's simply not true. The conversation, as I recollect, is that there are always opportunities for CDCs and school districts to collaborate better. And also under the current structure, it's allowable for districts to bid on these contracts, as you just heard Ms. Stein testify to. This bill does not make that any more or less attractive. This bill does not take away the authority and the local control of the CDC or give more authority to the school districts. And no matter if it goes to DFS, no matter if it stays at the Department of Health or goes to the Department of Education, by federal law, the state education agency, the Department of Education, is ultimately responsible. It makes sense to me that the authority in state statute would also rest with the Department of Education, so we can best support and build a framework to support local CDCs and the decisions that they make. In the last 3 years, I've tried multiple times to rectify and clarify what Ms. Roan thought she heard on that day, and it has been to no avail. I have backpedaled and tried to explain. And I am testifying here and now today that in no way, shape, or form is this a foot in the door or a first step to school districts taking over CDCs or to the State Department of Education taking the CDCs or preschool and making them part of the K-12 system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, thank you for your comments. We did not move the motion, so it's not necessary for us to have a motion to lay it on the table. And so we will just continue our conversation on Monday. Final comment, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate the people who drove here today. And I think as we continue this Monday, I think it's important you get the invite so you can join us on the Zoom. We don't ask you to drive back down here again. And we're in budget week. It'll be shorter lunch hours. So if you would continue to join us via the Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.